Hello, my name is Dr. Joanna Kujawa, your spiritual detective who investigates with you the archetypes of the goddess, spirituality and sexuality, and goddess consciousness. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we have a special guest, Amanda Radcliffe, who is going to tell us about her unique journey in a moment. But please let me explain first why I invited Amanda to show, simply because, in my book, The Other Goddess, in part 3, I'm discussing Mary Magdalene in southern France, the possibility of that. And I have a special section on the Cathars. And Amanda has a very unique story, her own story relating to the Cathar movement in southern France. So Amanda, can you tell me something about, can you tell us something about your journey towards Cathars? How did it all start? Did you wake up one day and what happened, right? Why did you even go to southern France?
It's a very strange story, like a lot of our stories are, who embark upon this kind of path, I think. Many, many years ago, when I was at university studying theatre and feminist theology, I found a book in a little bookshop in the south of England by a man called Arthur Gurdam, who was a British doctor. And the book was called, what was it called? Reflections of Psychic Survival, Paradise Found, Reflections of Psychic Survival. And because I've always been clairvoyant since I was a child and it runs in our family, it appealed to me, and I thought, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. I will get this book. And the book was very surprising because it spoke all about how this man, who was a very upper class British doctor, who was an atheist, educated at Oxford, became obsessed with the Cathars because he was working in a psychiatric hospital, and many of the women that he was treating were actually what he called repressed clairvoyants. And so they were having genuine visions, but because it was 1950s and 1960s England, nobody believed them. And so these women in the hospital started drawing Cathar crosses and writing in Old French and writing in Occitan and waking up with these drawings that they didn't remember having done. And because he was well educated and he was a historian and he studied at Oxford, he then thought, well, there's something happening here, because there were more than one, of these women. So he started to look it up, and he discovered that these were real symbols, and the women would sometimes speak in very kind of romantic, flowery language about dualism and about evil and about good and about, many of them were afraid of fire. And so he thought, okay, there's something happening here and I have to investigate. So bear in mind, this was 1950s, 1960s England. No one was speaking about the Cathars. This could not have been imaginary. And so he then took his own journey to investigate about the Cathars, and he had to go to France to do that. There was not much literature in England about this at that time. And he discovered that everything they were saying was true. So that started him on his own journey of discovery.
So
and
can I just interrupt, because I just realized that I missed my introduction, because not everybody is aware about Cathar. So maybe I would just mention that there are 12th century Cathar. It actually comes from pure. They call themselves pure ones. 12th century spiritual people who lived in southern France, had very interesting beliefs, and we'll talk about it in a moment because we do not know much about them. They were persecuted by the Catholic Church and also the nobility from northern France, because southern France was such an advanced region at the time. So, everybody wanted the good, so to speak. It was like California at its best, with many, not only spiritual people, but, arts patrons and troubadours, and poetry was born there, and female troubadours. It was a very advanced region in France. And for some reason, also the Catholic Church was after them because they didn't comply with the teachings of the church, and they believed that they have more pure version of the teachings. So I think, and then eventually during their crusade, which was launched against them, they were all burned at stake, and at Montsegur, which is the last stand. So this is what perhaps I should have said right at the beginning of this interview. So sorry to interrupt you. So just to give a little bit of a background to your own story and Gurdam's story as well, which I know, especially I think I remember he was talking about Miss Miles there, the
Right,
one that had, Miss Miles, and I'm not sure Miss Smith, but I'm not sure, but
that's
I know
right.
Miss. And so I didn't want to interrupt you just in the flow, but just so some people who do not know much about Cathars or have not heard of them, they know that it was a powerful movement which was very brutally spiritual movement in the 12th century France, southern France, which was brutally repressed, and that's why these women probably had this kind of memories of fire and so on, because they were probably burned at the stake, right? So just this apologies for this interruption.
No apologies needed, and that was an excellent explanation, brilliant explanation. I couldn't have said it better myself, really. You clearly have a very passionate interest in the Cathars too. So that was how it began with me, this book, and it was many years ago. I was really young when I read it, and I could never have imagined what my life would have then led to. And so when I read it, it resonated with me. That's all I can say. And it made sense. But then it was only about 10 years ago where it really started to come back into focus in my life through a series of different events. And the main one was becoming involved in the Gnostic Church in France. And it was through my ordination into the church, which was set up by a man called Jules Doinel, as I'm sure you know, who was also a spiritualist. And he was given the information in the 19th century with Lady Caithness during a seance in Paris that you must recreate the Cathar Gnostic Church. And 13 Cathars appeared in a seance and gave their names to him and to his witnesses. And Jules Doinel used to be a librarian in Orléans. And so he had access to hidden records that the public couldn't get at those times. And he managed to correlate the names of the 13 Cathars that gave their names. So what's interesting to me about this is that the Cathars, obviously they believed in reincarnation. And what is so strange is that it seems as if their spirits or part of their spirits have continued on and have made themselves known at the time when the prophecy was approaching, because obviously you'll know about the prophecy of Guillaume Balibast, who said in 1321, in 700 years, the laurel will turn green again and the Cathars will return. Yeah.
So, but we'll discuss the prophecy perhaps a little bit later, because it is a very interesting prophecy. But, about your own journey again. So how did you find yourself in France? So was it the interest with the Gnostic Church, or was a series of events? What happened?
A series of events, absolutely. I knew clairvoyantly in 2009 that I would be going to France. I just knew. I woke up one morning and I knew, and I became obsessed with France.
Yeah.
And I started looking at different places. No, that's not the right one. That's not the right one. And my partner at the time thought I was crazy, because we had a very settled life in England and it seemed very surreal to him. Yes. And yet, so that was 2009. And in the same year, I had a very strange dream, which you probably heard me speak about in other interviews. But that dream I later discovered was the symbols in that dream led me to Saint Sulpice in Paris. And from there, I became involved with the esoteric orders and so on. So it all started with a dream. So little synchronicities, dreams, and being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people, and being open to being guided, I would say.
Yes, and having the courage to follow the symbols, because how many times we receive the symbols, but do we follow them? Because it usually seems to be so counter rational understanding of the mind, of the world, right? Because our mind is screaming every time we get a sign, right?
Yes.
to take us out of a, so to speak, matrix, yeah, or a conditioning or a set of life. You know, you have a good life, why would you leave it, right? Crazy, but this is what, you know, pretty much every seeker in every tradition says. So just having the courage. So I'm glad you had this courage. So how did you end up in southern France? So you were in Paris.
I'd followed the signs and I ended up living in Paris. And I had a partner there who was a film director. So we were living together, having a nice life in Paris. And I was working for an esoteric web TV channel there called Bagless TV, which is all about French esotericism. And part of my job was to recruit speakers for our channel and to do the research about them. And so during that time, I became involved in something called the Mary Magdalene Conference, which is also in France. And through the organizer there, I got a couple of names of people that he suggested I could interview for the channel. And one of them was the name of a man called Richard Stanley. And so I contacted Richard, and this is where it kind of gets a bit complicated, because a few months before I contacted him, I'd had my own encounter with the White Lady that I've spoken about before, which was totally unexpected.
Okay, so could you share some spirit, because I know that you had some spiritual experiences associated with the divine feminine. Would you like to share them with us? And also, as an introduction, would you tell us about, were you interested in the divine feminine in any form before that, or were they unexpected?
I was, because excuse me, when I was a child, please excuse me, I'm recovering from the COVID. So when I was a child, I always had the feeling that God was near, but God was feminine to me. And I was not raised Catholic, and so this was an alien concept. And I became friends with a Catholic girl in my area, and I used to sneak off to the Catholic Church and pray to Mary, secretly pray the Hail Mary. And where I grew up is an area with a lot of Irish immigrants, and so whether someone is Protestant or Catholic, it still means something here. And it, you know, they're not supposed to be friends because of the troubles in Ireland, but we were friends. And I became obsessed with the idea that here we had a feminine divine that I could relate to, and it felt more like what I used to experience. And so I was very disappointed in my church. We couldn't pray to Mary, we couldn't pray the Hail Mary, we didn't have the rosary, we couldn't pray to the saints. It was very boring and very masculine, and it didn't feel right to me. So that was where it began. And then later on, I studied feminist theology at university, and that's when I became really immersed in the study of the lives of the Christian mystics. So Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa de Avila, Julian of Norwich, and so on. And again, I could relate to this very kind of embodied, sensual longing for the divine, and this passion, you know, of the senses, and this ecstasy that they were speaking of. And I thought, okay, here's something again that I can relate to from experience. And so that's where it really began. But then, like many, you know, young women, I left Christianity behind because I thought, well, I can't be a hypocrite, you know, sex before marriage, anti-homosexuality, anti this, anti that. And I thought, no, I need to explore other things. And then I never found my place in my explorations in the New Age world, and or in other traditions or philosophies. And really, I went to a little tiny chapel in Wales in my late 20s, and there I had a very powerful experience again of the feminine divine. That was my first embodiment in a place like a church. And it was in a tiny shrine to a Celtic saint called Saint Melangeth. And I really felt her come into me. And that was when I realized, okay, there's something real here. There's something that I don't know about that's very, very ancient and I need to discover. So that was how it started. But again, I kind of kept pushing it under because I didn't want this life. I wanted the normal life, you know, didn't want this.
Yes.
I tried. And so, again, a decade later, it resurfaced. And that was when I realized, no, less than a decade, that was when I realized I can't escape this. It's just going to keep happening. And if I don't accept it, my life is going to continue to be derailed, which is what happens. And so the first experience that I had, often in our tradition, we say, we meet the Black Madonna before we meet the White Lady. And that's because so many of us have had this experience whereby we meet the Black Madonna before we meet the White Lady. And that's how it started for me. I was working as a clairvoyant. I did a reading for a man. And afterwards, just this experience of the Black Madonna just took me over completely. And I was taken into the cosmos, shown the workings of black holes and gravity and reincarnation and death. It was a very strange experience, but it was an ecstatic experience and full of love and eros and sensuality and embodiment and beauty, and a sense that no matter what happens here on earth and how terrible it may seem, from her perspective, it's all perfect. That sounds really strange, I know, and I got the impression that reincarnation is a choice, that we are not sent down here as any kind of a punishment. And, coming back is a conscious choice that the soul makes. And we can choose not to come back also.
So that's a beautiful, as you said, both spiritual and sensual experience and ecstatic experience. And this is what I am interested in as well. But can I ask you a very strange question? So this Black Madonna, did she have a face? How did you have a sense that she is the Black Madonna?
She was a black vortex, like a womb, like a circle, like a mandala. Sparkling with little pinpoints of light that were zipping in and out. And I understood that they were lives, every life, not just human life, zipping in and out of her womb, in a sense. And coming in and out of her realm, but that we always exist within her realm. We just are not aware of it. And not only is it encompassing us, but it's within us. It's within every single atom, right down to the subatomic particles, which is what I was shown, that we are not only held together by her love, but we are encompassed by it. So there's a kind of suction holding us together, and an external gravity which holds the universe together. That sounds hard to explain, but
oh, it sounds perfectly fine, because I did, and I'm sure many people who are viewing this had similar experiences of cosmic consciousness, really, right? Whether, it's just for you, it was in the form of Black Madonna. So fantastic experience of cosmic ecstasy, of cosmic consciousness. Thank you for sharing it with us here. And also, you said that you had other experiences, because you said that the Black Madonna usually precedes the White Lady. So would you like to share that experience with us as well?
Yeah, so it's strange, because that experience led me to, because I had no context with this experience, by the way. This happened in 2013, before I went to France.
Okay.
And it was only through talking further with one of my friends, Raylene Abbott, who wrote one of the first books on the divine feminine, in fact, about 30 years ago in France, about my experience, that she helped me to understand who it was and set me on my pilgrimage to explore the Black Madonna in France. So that was kind of how it started, through that ecstatic experience of an immanent feminine divine personal interaction with such. I then realized I had to follow this physically and go out into the world and locate the places and the positions where she also may manifest. So I went to do a pilgrimage to Orcival in the Auvergne region, the Puy-de-Dôme in France. And in Orcival, in Puy-de-Dôme, they have many Black Madonnas, and it's very famous for that. And no one really knows where they come from or why they are there. But the region is a volcanic region. and it's very isolated and remote. So to travel there on foot would have been extremely difficult when these Madonnas were placed there. And they have so many stories about them. And this particular one that I wanted to see and do my pilgrimage to is a Black Madonna that has been painted white recently. And she has gigantic hands, and she's sitting in the hieratic position with Jesus on her knees, so like Isis.
Yes.
And she's very, very ancient.
Yes.
She used to be kept in a crypt and only brought out 4 times a year. But recently, well, I don't know how many years ago now, but it's a full-time pilgrimage site now.
Okay.
So she's always on display. And I'd read that there were many miracles associated with this virgin, and I wanted to go because I was praying for 200 people that day. So I thought, okay, let's choose a really powerful virgin and go. So I went with my partner at the time, and we prayed late at night at the basilica because it was open all night. And as I was praying, I had a very powerful ecstatic experience of the energy under the ground, like lifting me up. And I went back to the hotel. Our hotel was opposite the church directly, in a little square with some shops and the church and our hotel. And that night, my partner was downstairs, but I was sleeping. And I woke up and I had this white light dream in which the light was so bright in my dream that it actually woke me up. And then I opened my eyes and I realized I was not dreaming. It was there in the room, and it took the shape of a woman, and it had no face, but I could see there was a veil or a cloak where the head would be, and a red light where the heart would be, scintillating red light that's sparkling. And I'd say she was about 9 feet tall, and she was hovering about 3 feet above the ground. And then I was terrified. I couldn't speak. I was hiding under the duvet, literally like this, pinching myself to see if I was definitely awake, but I was awake because I was so scared. And then she took, as I say, took a shape, and then she spoke to me and she said, people come here because they think they're coming to see the Black Madonna, but this is what I really look like. You called me, so what do you want? And I could not even think, let alone speak. I was terrified. And so she extended a filament of light from the center of her body that scanned me up and down, like the center of my body, for about an hour. Wow. I couldn't move. Yeah, I couldn't move.
So it was like a long encounter. It wasn't a kind of one moment of vision, but it was like she stayed for 1 hour, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
She wanted you.
I don't know why, but yes, it seems that way. Yeah. And so and she like after about an hour, she spoke again and she said, and this is where it gets really weird. What you want is the truth, and the truth you shall have. And if you want to know the truth about your boyfriend, look on his phone. And I said, so I suddenly woke up out of like this trance and said, what? No. And then she disappeared. So I was very disappointed. But of course, when my boyfriend finally, came back into the room, I had to tell him what had happened. And then I said, can I look at your phone? And he said, no.
Yeah, so there was something there, right? So
there was
something there. That's quite funny, I know, because when you have such a profound encounter, you'd think we would be talking about the mysteries of the universe, right?
Exactly. But it gets stranger still because the next morning after I had breakfast and talked about this, we went to a little shop because I wanted to buy a knife to replace a knife I'd lost, and it was the shop opposite the church. So like I said, there's a little square. Our hotel was here, the church was here, and the shop was there. And I went in and asked the owner of the shop, who was a man in his late 30s, have you ever heard of anyone having any strange experiences here, like related to the basilica or anything? And I never told him anything. And he said, yes, me. And then he told me that 1 year, almost to the day ago, he went to the basilica to pray because he decided he was going to commit suicide.
Oh, God, yeah.
His wife had left him and taken the children, and he felt like he had no reason to go on. So he went into the basilica and prayed, and then that night he was in bed. So bear in mind that his apartment was above his shop, so it was in direct alignment with our hotel and the church. And he had a bright white light in his dream that woke him up, and it was so bright that he sprang out of bed looking to see if it was coming from outside, and there was nothing. He got back into bed and it took the shape of a woman. I'm getting goosebumps telling you this story because I was in shock when he told me. And then he went on to say how the woman was about 8 feet tall. She wore a cloak. She had no face. She was made of light. And she said to him, "Do not commit suicide. If you do, this, and this will happen." And then apparently told him all the reasons why his marriage had failed and how he needed to live his life from that moment on. And he said that he'd always been very psychic as a child and very sensitive, but he'd closed it down because of being a man. And because of that, he closed down everything, including his heart, his emotions, and that's why his wife had left. And so he was smiling and smiling, like telling the story and saying, "Oh, my life is completely different now. The lady showed herself to me, and now I know I'm never alone."
Well, that's a beautiful story. Thank you. That's a beautiful story. So for you, did something shift after this experience with with the white lady, as you call the encounter? Yeah.
It changed everything. Of course, in France, we have a long tradition of apparitions of Mary. So for him, he thought he'd seen Mary, but I didn't know what I'd seen. I had no preconceptions. So I just called her the lady, or the white lady. And it changed everything, that experience for me, because I felt almost stigmatized by it. Okay, I met him and I could speak with him about it, but no one else that I knew had ever had this type of experience, and it felt strange. And so when I was working for the web TV channel in Paris that I mentioned, I reached out to Richard Stanley. The reason I connected with him was because he also saw the white lady, but he saw one in Montségur. And he told me, this is part of an ancient tradition in the Pyrenees and in France of sightings of the white lady that go back to Neolithic times.
Yes.
So it's not something new that's just come, in Lourdes. It's been happening for many, many, many generations. And we believe that the Cathars knew this, and that's the reason why they chose Montségur and Occitania and the Pyrenees for their base, because we believe that they had encounters with her also, with a living embodiment of the divine feminine. That, when I say living, I mean interdimensional.
Yes. Of course, interdimensional being. So this is very beautiful. Thank you. And it brings two things to my mind. One is that, because I was raised as a Catholic, I'm not anymore, although I had no bad experiences. It didn't explain anything to me, but it gave me spiritual practice, which now I have, I have a different spiritual practice, but at least I knew about spiritual practice and I knew about the divine feminine. But in many regions of Europe, they have apparitions of the divine feminine. They call it Virgin Mary, and I think because this is their reference, but as you said, point of reference, right? But as you said, it is a much more ancient being, or perhaps a part of, I would argue, and this is what I'm trying to do in my book, that it's a form of our own consciousness, of divine consciousness manifesting collectively for us. And, we just give it different names, so because of a Catholic past in Europe, people call it Virgin Mary, but what is it really, right? I think this is our consciousness bursting out, goddess consciousness, and that wants to be noticed. But these are beautiful stories. Thank you so much for this. And there was another thing, but I already carried away in a different direction that I wanted to say. So I'll move to another question. we actually know very little about Cathar beliefs, right? Because, and just for the listeners as well, because they were basically all burned at the stake, we know only some things, like about many Gnostic groups that the enemies wrote about them. And in the case of the Cathars, we know about their beliefs because, what they got out of them during the tortures, basically by the Holy Inquisition, by the Dominicans. So so anything that I have learned, in when studying it, it was very bizarre because, they were emphasizing very bizarre things just to discredit them. However, just to discredit them. However, I think it is very interesting, and now even for historians who have no spiritual interest, just, look at Cathars from a historical point of view, that, they were the perfecti, or who took the consolamentum, the highest form of initiation to the Cathar movement and preaching, very often were women. And in fact, Cathars encourage women and to take consolamentum, to be healers and preachers, which was quite common in early Christianity, and it was repressed very, soon afterwards, right? Especially after the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century and so on. And in one statement, one Dominican torturer bragged that, he got out of the Cathar that, they were followers of Mary Magdalene, that they believed that Mary Magdalene was more important than Virgin Mary, because we know now, although it is quite recent, that they didn't think much of Virgin Mary because of their beliefs that, she was basically the body that brought Christ consciousness into the world. So they didn't dislike her, but they thought it was her role. However, many of our churches were named or consecrated after Mary Magdalene. So in my book, The Other Goddess, I argue that there must be some connection there between Mary Magdalene and Cathars. Do you have any knowledge or experience of this? And if not, that's fine.
I do. One thing that I have is the oral tradition of Occitania. So living in Occitania for so long, I have met many people in the region, some people who had families who descended from the Cathars, the offspring who survived, and people involved in different esoteric groups. And so I've learned very much from word of mouth, inner teachings of these people and their family lineages. And so what I can say about this is that, yes, I have been told that the belief that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had children and offspring actually originated with the Cathars, and that they in fact believed that Christ was a man, and the Christ spirit came into, so Jesus was a man, the Christ spirit came into a man called Jesus and left him on the cross. And that's why he says, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" So the Cathars believed that the Jesus was a man and Christ was a spirit. And so Christ spirit spiritualized the man Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and he then went on to reproduce and create a spiritualized lineage of human beings who were more spiritually adept than those previously in existence, shall we say. So a line of elect, as we could say in Gnosticism. And of course, now we know about this because we know about the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and so on. However, the Cathars truly believed that they were descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And it's for this reason that when they were killed in Béziers during the terrible massacre, they chose Mary Magdalene's feast day, 22nd of July, and they locked them inside a church dedicated to Mary Magdalene, and they set the whole place on fire. And 20,000 people died during that persecution. And that's not an exaggeration. Some people have questioned me when I've said that, but it's not. I've read the records. And so this is where that comes from. And I have that on authority from people whose families were Cathars. in the past.
So now I remember my other question finally that I had previously, which is basically, and I have two questions. I hope I remember the second one and don't get carried away because it's so fascinating, you know. But do you believe that you are a reincarnation of a Cathar?
Wow, now that is a very interesting question. I didn't want to believe that. Let's just put it that way. You know, I wanted it to be normal. However, when I first went to Montsegur, I'll just briefly tell you, the reason I ended up going to Montsegur is because I was told by a clairvoyant in 2016 that I would go to Montsegur and there I would recreate the initiation teachings of the Cathars and create the Gnostic Church. Bear in mind, in 2016, I was living in Paris and I had no intention of going to Montsegur and I didn't know anyone in Montsegur. So 2 years later, I was living in Montsegur with Richard, the guy I was telling you about, who also saw the White Lady. So we connected through my job and we ended up together, and he introduced me to Occitania and to Montsegur. And so, yeah. And so when I first saw Montsegur, I just cried because I felt like I had found what I'd been searching for all of my life, this place of home. And I felt that with all of Occitania. It was the place I'd been searching for all my life. And then when I was living there, I had a lot of profound experiences, but the same clairvoyant and I were talking. And of course, she was correct in what she'd predicted. And she said to me, you know, have you delved into what you remember yet? So I told her the things that I remembered. And I remembered dates and names and places. And I kept saying to Richard, because he was always obsessed with 1244 when all the Cathars were banned. And I said to him, no, it started in 1209, but I had no knowledge of this, no conscious knowledge. And my memory was from 1209, from being outside the castle walls in Carcassonne, trying to get in to see my mother. And all of this came back to me after I went to Puiver Castle, and I recognized, I kept crying. I was crying at this castle and saying, this is not how it looked. This is not how it looked. This is all wrong. That's in the wrong place. This has been demolished. And I was really upset. It was like a bleed through from this other life. And when I went downstairs into the crypt, I recognized it as the crypt in my memory where my mother had her altar and her red book, her red Cathar book, which was in 2 languages. And this is what I remember. It was a red bound book. It was illuminated and it was in 2 languages. And when I went into the memory and Susan, the clairvoyant, helped me to remember these things, she didn't guide me in any way. She simply was there listening and taking down notes. She said, what do you see when you read the book? And so I read out what I could see, and the only language I could understand, and it was in Latin, but of course I don't speak Latin, which she does. So she understood. And the first lines of what I saw in the book was, this is the book of peace, is what it said. And the front cover of the book was an equal-armed cross inside a circle embossed in some kind of golden substance. And all I knew is that this book was very, very precious to my mother. And in my memory, I went to the castle in Carcassonne to get her out of the dungeons, and they said they would let her go if she would recant, but she wouldn't. And I was very against Catharism in my memory. I was very angry with her about it because I was quite young and, you know, I didn't understand. And I thought it was anti-life in this memory. So it's not what I would have expected if I was making this up, and I would have thought I was very pious, you know, parfait. I was very annoying.
That's a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing it with us. And now I will ask you a question that I know will upset lots of people, because I know lots of people are very interested in bloodlines and so on. But I am not so sure. But I am very open-minded, and I will tell you why. Because maybe because of my spiritual practice, I think what is truly important, and I'm for our spiritual evolution individually and collectively is a spiritual practice. Work on yourself, take responsibility for your evolution, right? Spiritual evolution. So my kind of argument against bloodlines, it's not like it's against bloodlines, but it is that there's a belief that some people are special and some people are not, and being a real or imaginary descendant of Jesus frees you, from not having a spiritual practice because you're special already, or, makes you somebody better. When I think in this conscious universe, we're all evolving, and there are no special people, so to speak. So you understand what I'm trying to say? That it's not just claiming, oh, I am from this lineage, and especially also New Age movement. I met so many special people and so many Mary Magdalenes, and
oh yeah, me too.
so and I'm not making fun of anybody's spiritual experience. I believe that spiritual experience is spiritual experience, but not what I have problem with. I'm not against anything, but what I have an maybe concern, about is that then they make them special, and then others are below them, when I think truly spiritual beings never feel this way, right? So if you would like to elaborate about the bloodlines and so on, and also where you're doing it, do you think, if you do believe in bloodlines, that there's something special about particular type of bloodline? Because I know it's a so I'm very open-minded, and I'm happy to be convinced. I'm just saying this one aspect only bothers me, that people think that they are special and they're more spiritually evolved, which I personally think is actually not spiritual in itself. What
I will say about the concept of bloodlines is things like psychic ability have been proven to be inherited. I mean, that's why so many families, it runs in so many families. And from what I understand about the bloodlines, it's simply that people with psychic ability, so we're not talking about Jesus here, we're talking about pre-existing shamanic practices, we could say, in pagan societies.
Yes.
So how I understand it is that pre-existing psychic or people with healing abilities and so on reproduced with others who had the same skills to continue on the gift of being able to access interdimensional consciousness for the purpose of the tribe. So it was never for self-aggrandizement. It was because the tribe in the ancient days, the leader was not only the one with the biggest muscles or the biggest store of food or the biggest weapons. The real leaders in shamanic traditions were those who could foresee what was coming. So who could say, don't do that, don't go there, take this option, don't take that one. Because those who can foresee can then divert and avert the disaster that's coming. And so from my understanding of the bloodline mysteries, that is a very, very important piece, because it goes back to way before Jesus. It goes back to how things were in tribal times. I mean, imagine living through the ice ages and all the different disasters that our ancestors have lived through. So for me, it has a very practical significance. And that's how it came into my life through the people that I met, and that's how they explained it. And what I'll say also is that the gifts come with disabilities also. Many people who have these bloodline abilities also have allergies, autoimmune conditions, can't bear to be in the sun, have all kinds of things. Some are hermaphrodites. I've met several people who come from these bloodlines who have deeply kind of interbred with each other over generations, and they are hermaphrodites. Several have connective tissue disorders, so it's like these spiritual gifts come with physical costs. And so this is why I'm a proponent of this, because I understand from personal experience that the gifts are not given without a price that we have to pay. And we are not rewarded for those gifts in our society the way it is today. In fact, we're told you're crazy, this is not real, you don't exist.
Yes.
psychics? What are psychics? Are you psychotic? You know?
I really like your explanation, and this is what I think my problem was with other explanations, because people I've met considered themselves really special when it was actually people with gifts which were passed genetically on, which is normal, right? Like anything else, like the color of eyes and so on, was for a collective evolution, you know, perhaps also for survival, regular survival, as you said, ice age and so on, but for a collective evolution. So it is this is for everyone, right? So this is for everyone.
It's
just not for
the
me
survival of the tribe. Yeah, I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Elaine Aron, who's written a book called The Highly Sensitive Person?
No, I didn't read her book.
Oh, she says, she gives another piece to this. She says that 20% of all species, including animals, are born highly sensitive with what could be termed intuitive or psychic abilities.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I actually think that animals are more psychic than most humans. You know, I love it because they can communicate with us telepathically, you know, and they are very emotional and so on. And, you know, I never shared it with anyone else, but for example, my grandmother definitely had abilities, and I think I inherited some of them. I never worked on them, but just, you know, they are useful in my spiritual practice, right? But I think it's skipped generation, I think, in my...
And actually, yeah, I'd like to say something else about that. Getting back to what you asked about spiritual practice. Having the bloodline, one of my teachers said to me, it means nothing. It's about what you do with it, how you use it, not for your own benefit, but to help others. Yeah, and he was very, very angry about a lot of the people that you're talking about. He had contempt for them.
Yeah, thank you for this clarification, because this is, you know, especially in New Age parlance, it means, you know, I'm special. So, to that, what you have just said, you know, I can completely relate. And could you comment, because there is lots of, discussion about types of actual blood types. You know, do you think it relates to this too?
I did a study with a man called Dr. David Ritchie. I helped him with some of his research for a book he wrote about this. He's passed away now, but he studied people who were what he called anomalously sensitive for 30 years in a clinical facility. And he discovered again that many people who were there with labels like borderline personality disorder, psychosis, or whatever, were actually clairvoyant and psychic, and nobody believed them, and who were receiving information all the time and didn't know how to filter it out, including some autistic people. In his research, he did find that there was a correlation to psychic ability and different blood groups. He did find that, but mostly with the rhesus negative, he did find there was a higher proportion of people rhesus negative that had these abilities. That was his research.
Okay,
I personally don't know.
That's my blood type too. So.
Well, there you go then, you see.
So maybe I'm resisting inevitable.
I think you're resisting, Joanna, I do. I understand.
So, because some people also, because I also love the work of Professor Pasulka, who talks about spiritual experiences in American cosmic, spiritual experiences and UFO phenomena and so on. Fantastic work. I highly recommend it. And, you know, some people believe that, again, people who had contact or abductees or something are of the same blood type. So, you know, maybe that they're just open to other experiences, right? So, and then maybe just deeper psychic abilities, or, you know, what is UFO? For example, Professor Pasulka, and I agree with her, although I'm not a specialist on this, just reading her books, is that it is basically an experience of some interdimensionality. Exactly. You know, it doesn't have to be like a spaceship on the sky, because you can have people, and some people see it, some people don't see it. How can you explain, right? Something like that. When with a spiritual experience, it can be either collective or individual, right? And so that's another very interesting area that I'm just starting to explore. So thank you for this clarification. I really appreciate your research and your work in this area. And also because at the beginning you mentioned it, and I just wanted to keep it till the end. We're talking about the Qatar Prophecy and the and Balibas, right? The last, they call him the last Cathar, as far as we know,
Yeah.
right? And you know, very colorful person. But he had a prophecy, and could you explain to us what is this prophecy? What this prophecy is, and what do we do with this, basically? Because you have to admit, you know, on this planet we went through many strange times, but this, you know, at the moment, last 3 years, and I don't think it's ending, we are going through some major shifts, and somebody is playing mercilessly with our consciousness, you know.
They are. That's a good description. Yes. Well, before I get into that, I just want to say that Richard and I made a film a couple of years ago with Nicolas Cage called Color Out of Space. And it's based upon the H.P. Lovecraft story. And we filmed it in Sintra, and it came out just before COVID exploded. And in the film, it's all about an alien virus that comes on a meteorite, infects the water supply, and it changes everything that surrounds it.
Wow, I just got cold shiver, you know, now, like
yeah.
you're saying this. Yeah.
I relate this very strongly to COVID. There is a theory that COVID did come on a meteorite that fell north of Wuhan just before the whole thing blew up, literally. And that has been put out by an astrobiologist who came up with the panspermia theory with his colleague Fred Hoyle many years ago now. And we put this in the movie. We were talking about how consciousness can enter our universe through space and viruses. And so this was an alien virus that came on a meteorite, infected the water, and changed everything that surrounded it. And this was our film that came out 2 months before COVID arrived.
Wow. Talking
globally.
About consciousness exploding, right?
Yeah.
I think consciousness wants to know itself through us, or want to be, or recognized in us and through us. So
that's right. And I think the virus wants this also. When I tuned into the virus, that's also what the virus wants.
Yeah, you think so?
To experience our consciousness.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean to harm us. It's just accidental. And that was the story in the movie, that the I know it's a diversion from your question, but I have to say it because it's related to the prophecy in some way, I believe. It's no coincidence that Richard and I were the only 2 English-speaking guides in Montsegur at the time when all of this happened, and we just made this film. And when I tuned into the virus when it first happened, that's exactly what I received, what you have just said, that it wanted to experience our consciousness. And it didn't mean to kill us, it was accidental. And the color in the movie communicated with me, with Richard, and with our clairvoyant Susan, and was telling us, I don't want to be seen as evil. I want to be seen as beautiful. I'm not evil. I'm just matter in the wrong place.
Oh, that's a story, for many of us, I guess, right? Like we are just consciousness, embodied consciousness. Except that, if I can just say something here, that, in my book, I want to say that we should enjoy this embodiment. That's why I also talk about, sexual ecstasy or erotic ecstasy and spiritual ecstasy, and so on, because I think there's a lot of rejection, of sensuality, especially in spiritual domain. And I think that's wrong, because there are traditions who celebrate it,
I agree. I think
spirituality. But perhaps I am digressing again. So
no, you're not. We have so much to talk about, Joanna. I just want to say that's why I think Mary Magdalene is so important as an icon for our times.
Absolutely, I completely agree. She is the spiritual and erotic goddess, so to speak. So and our consciousness is seeking that,
That's
so
right.
What about the prophecy and what we do with this, because I think we need some practical advice here too.
The prophecy came about. So the reason I mentioned the pandemic and the movie is because the prophecy happened on the tail end of that. So 2021. is when Belly burst 700 years after when he made that prophecy. And before that prophecy happened, Montsegur was decimated by box tree moths from China. We had a plague of moths before we had a plague of COVID. And so the mountain started to fall apart. Trees were being uprooted. Rocks were falling onto the ground. All the roots of the trees were being eaten away by these moths. We couldn't get rid of them. I mean, they tried all kinds of things. They went through the whole of Occitania and different parts of France. And then literally we thought the mountain was never going to recover. Most of the trees were dead. And yet, just before the prophecy, the laurel turned green again. Literally, the trees on the mountain that were decimated by those moths started to get green again. And so we saw that as a literal embodiment of this prophecy. It was no coincidence.
But what did the prophecy actually say? Can you tell Alice?
Yeah, it said in 700 years, the laurel will turn green again, the laurel being one of the representations of the Cathar faith. Good men and women shall return. So the good men and women, as you know, that was the name the Cathars gave themselves. They were called the good men and the good women to themselves and each other. And so for Ballyburst, he was trying to say, you can kill me, but you can't kill our faith and you can't kill our reincarnations. You know, you can take my life now, but I will always return because we will always return. And that's the story of the Cathars that I've heard again and again, the same phrase, that we shall always return. It's what I've heard so many times in Occitania from so many different people, including the story that never ends is another phrase that we hear. And why? The question is, why should we return? Why should we keep returning? And what is asked of us now? And so I really believe now, having immersed myself even more deeply into the energies and the representations and the memories of the Cathars now, that they had a technology which enabled them to walk into the flames without fear. And maybe that's what we are now being asked to rediscover, how we can walk into the flames of this terrible annihilation of everything we've ever known, which is happening at the moment, without fear. And how did they achieve that? Well, they believed, first of all, that we are not only this body. However, that did not mean that they denied the flesh. And this is a lie that has been propagated. Cathar families were always very large. Esclamont de Foix had 9 children who survived and went on to be the high priestess of the Cathars. If they believed that sex was wrong and evil, and the body was sinful and disgusting, and that women were, you know, evil temptresses, why have so many children? It doesn't make sense. And the Cathar faith was propagated through the women, and I found records that prove this. That grandmothers were educating granddaughters in special schools that were set aside for this purpose in different locations. And Esmond herself was the one who insisted upon using Montsegur as an initiation retreat for Cathar women. That's how it was before it became the hiding place for everybody, for the survivors.
It is interesting. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, please go on.
It is interesting to me as I'm listening to you, because the same stories seem to be repeated in all traditions. I studied very deeply Tantric traditions because my interest in spirituality and sexuality, and the same story happens. You know, very secret knowledge was transmitted from woman to woman, from yogini to yogini, from dakini to dakini, and they had special powers in a sense that were both interdimensional and human, you know, because of our spiritual practice, or I don't know, now maybe bloodline, I don't know. But gradually, you know, the closer we get to our times, they were either, you know, forgotten or ridiculed, or because that tradition was orally transmitted, eventually it was written down by male scholars, and they actually started to use the rituals, you know, for their own benefit by using women and this divine energy, you know, that is within a female body. So it's very interesting for me to hear, you know, but and I know that, you know, Cathars obviously, you know, had female teachers and so on, and preachers, but that this tradition is so old, and it was actually passed orally also from a woman to a woman, from generation to generation.
Yeah, and that was not because they were segregating the sexes because they thought it was evil to keep them together. That was not why at all. It was very much a woman's tradition, and propagated by the female in the family almost every single time from my research. And also, just to add to that, with your interest in Tantra, which I've also studied a little, it was said that there was a Tantric tradition within the Cathar faith.
Oh, really?
Which connects in with the practices and the rites of the troubadours. And that the troubadours and the Cathars are basically one and the same. I discovered this very recently, that the Cathars worshipped something known as the Lady. And that this is where the cult of Mary, in fact, comes from. You spoke about the Dominicans and how they were present in the Languedoc. They were present there because they wanted to get rid of this heresy. They tried by introducing the worship of the Virgin, which was never there before the crusade against the Cathars.
That's right. So look out, everyone, because the goddess is on the rise, you know, and I think it is, the consciousness is breaking in all the right places right now. But also, I think there's a more pressure to repress what I call goddess consciousness, simply because, you know, the rise of technology also, which is very much, I would say, and nothing against technology, we are talking together because of technology, but putting all our faith and giving up our spirituality for the sake of technology, I just intuitively know deeply in my gut that it's a very wrong turn. And, you know, on the last page of my book, I just say, make a turn, make the other turn, you know, don't go where everybody else is going. Like in the film, you know, Midnight Express, I don't know if you remember this film, the prisoner starts to, he has this moment of awakening. It's a fantastic moment when the prisoner starts to, they all walk in one direction, and this one man, the main character, starts to walk in the opposite direction, and it is a moment of fear and the moment of complete freedom. So, you know, this is what I'm calling for, and I'm sure that this is what you're calling for in your work, and I'm calling for in my book, because it is not just, and this is what I want to our listeners to know, it is not just about talking about ancient goddesses. This is not, you know, who they were. It's a good start. This is not just talking about who Cathars were and what they did, and yes, it was unjust what was done to them, but what we are going to do with it now, you know. So as you said, like, so this is this prophecy, but what now? You know, be embodiment of this, right? Be embodiment of this, and at times are calling for this different turn, because otherwise, what you know, others that assume power over us, plan for us, is simply unacceptable. So we have to have this courage, and we have to have a spiritual resolve.
That's right. Well, in a way, we are going through a crusade against our unconsciousness right now.
Absolutely. That's really well put. A crusade against our consciousness. Yes. And somebody, you know, it sounds like a science fiction movie, but it feels like somebody tries to harness our consciousness, but do not let them, right? Like, you claim your consciousness, you're the part of cosmic consciousness, of divine consciousness, and what I call just goddess consciousness, right? Not that it's anything against men, absolutely not, but this is this other form of consciousness that was repressed both on women, in women and men. It was a fantastic conversation, Amanda. Would you like to add anything else?
I'd like to ask you a question, actually, if I might.
Okay, sure.
One thing that came up when we were talking is, I thought about when people are suffering, there's a real urge to escape the body, and there's a real urge, and I think that's where a lot of these negative Gnostic beliefs have come from, which then permeated through into Christianity with this dualism, good and evil and everything else, and I think it's the men, men came up with these beliefs. Seeing women as the cause. I'm sure you've read some of these Gnostic texts in which they talk about the womb as like the evil trap that traps the sparks of light and so on. And then of course we have Eve and the temptation story in the Bible that led to the fall. And what I'm wondering is, I think that there's a genuine pain, a suffering that has been behind the creation of these beliefs, these metaphors, these stories, because of the universality of suffering. So how can we, in your experience, continue to be in our bodies during times of suffering, which I think a lot of people are going through now?
That's a very good question, and a very difficult question, I must say. And historically speaking, just first I refer to historical thing. I can understand, although, it was turned into something really evil unnecessarily, when people were saying if woman's body, is this trap, because there is the temptation, which is this, attraction, right? But on the other hand, on the other hand, that means children, childbearing, and, it's very difficult to come. To do your spiritual practice when suddenly you have 9 children, unless you're your prince, right? And so on. So I understand this, although it was turned into something evil, right? So this is a question that I think for millennia we're asking ourselves. But what I have learned from the tradition of Esoteric Tantra, let's put it Esoteric Tantra, everything is consciousness. And if we can only remember, and it's very difficult, that we are this embodiment of this consciousness in all its forms, and this is, and suffering, unfortunately, can be a part of that, like we all suffer and we all eventually die. So in some forms of esoteric Hinduism, we talk about the non-attachment, but I don't think it's very healthy, right? I think that we have to, it is almost like, for me, it's almost like a cosmic journey. We have to enjoy this journey, and like you can have anything you want, but with consequences. And I think we are this consciousness embodied, and we made this choice. I agree with you when we're talking about it at the beginning of our conversation. So we made certain choices, even if we do not remember them. There's this fantastic story in Esoteric Tantra when, the goddess consciousness embodies herself, which is really a Gnostic story of Sophia as well. She sees something and it's attractive, it's below, and she embodies and she forgets who she is for a while. And at certain moments she wakes up. And I think we are at the moment of awakening as well. We are the Sophias, we are the Shaktis, who we fell into this experience, but by choice. It's not a tragic accident. We went into this experience and now we are awakening. We are going, like I'm saying in my book, walk in the opposite direction now, because it's the path of awakening, and we have to go through this. However, embodiment also creates suffering as much as joy. And that's the deal. As long as we are in, these 3 dimensions, there is no escape from this. And I think that I understand why this big tech and so, pharmaceuticals, they think, apart from their own agendas, they want to free us from the suffering. And it's in some ways noble. But what I'm saying, it is a part of human experience. And for me, prolonging life in unnatural ways is not the answer. Because, it was meant to be a trip. You understand? It's meant to be experience of embodiment. And we are belonging here for a moment. And we chose this moment, even if it seems incomprehensible sometimes, especially when we see suffering of the ones that we love, or, our own suffering. I would never deny suffering in the world. But as strange as it seems, we did choose it, and it is our experience, and it will pass. And we actually are much bigger than this experience, and we belong also somewhere else. And this is just a temporary experience. So I'm not sure if it makes any sense, but it is like when you go on any adventure, So, for example, you like mountain climbing. There will be ecstasy, there will be highs, and there might be consequences. And we knew when we embodied that these are the consequences, you know, as Buddhism says also, right? There is suffering and there is death. And that's a part of human condition, but being human is just an experience. We are more than that. This is the only way I can explain that.
I love what you said, and I really love what you said about needing to enjoy the embodiment, enjoy the experience, because too many of the Eastern traditions again speak about denial of the body, denial of the emotions, especially samsara, maya. Feelings don't matter, it's all illusion or it's a trap. And I feel that dualistic, that extreme dualistic ideology is against the feminine, it's against this totality that we're speaking of, which, I mean, to give birth is an extremely painful experience. Yet without it, none of us would be here.
Welcome to the world. Welcome to the world,
Yeah.
you know, for the mother and for the baby. So this is the body. So I would say, look around. You know, I live in subtropical Australia by choice. It's a choice, right? So I love it. You know, it was a long journey for me, and the tropical birds are singing, you know, and there are beautiful trees, and there are all kinds of natural disasters. It's Australia, everybody, you know, hears about it on the news. But this is the body of a goddess. That's goddess consciousness. And what is goddess consciousness? It's what's called prakriti in Tantric Hinduism, which is basically, this is the embodied consciousness that is in action, because the other form of consciousness is asleep. Right?
Yeah.
So it is there, it is perfect, there is no suffering, but there is no ecstasy either. And and this consciousness, you know, seeks this ecstasy, and we have this opportunity to experience this ecstasy, but there is no ecstasy without pain, you know, in our dimension at least. And I think this is probably the most exciting with all dimensions, you know, for people who want to ascend and so on, you know. Everybody wants to ascend and move on to a different levels, but this is your adventure, you know. And it's not supposed to be easy. If it's easy, it's not an adventure. Okay, so this is your adventure. Claim it, enjoy it, and yes, there will be pain.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Amanda, it was a really wonderful conversation. I'm really grateful for this. Please tell viewers how they can connect with you, and I'll leave also the link to your school. But would you
sure.
would you like to say something at the end about your school? Or
yeah, so I run a mystery school. I take only a handful of people every year, and it's passing on the things that I was taught in my own ordination training in different esoteric groups in France, which I've been permitted to do. It's very different than what's available in the New Age movement. It's a bit more academic, but it also involves serious practice. And if anyone's interested in finding out more about that, they can look on my website, which is my name, AmandaMariamneRadcliffe.com, or find me on Facebook.
So this is the best way to contact you, via your school or via your Facebook page, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And for people who want to connect also with me, you know, I'm here on this channel. And also, once again, you know, please, if you want to delve more into this, check out my book, The Other Goddess. I bury my soul there. So it was quite a process, spiritual process, actually writing of this, because I just went for it, you know, no more hiding. So the way, I guess, like you're doing now, right, Amanda? You just, this is it, you know, no more pretending. Yeah, you have to be real, right?
Yeah, we do. We have an obligation because of the gifts we've been given.
That's right. So once again, thank you so much, Amanda. Until next time.
Until next time, thank you, Joanna.